I'm Mike Costello, and I'm here with Dr. Ivers Freelander, and we'd like to talk to you about God's good time. You know, all things work together for good, we know that, but we often get impatient about life, and we think that things should happen at different timing. And yet, we know from a spiritual standpoint, from a psychological standpoint, and from a practical standpoint, that things always happen in their right time, don't they, Iris?
Yes, they do. And as you just said, we get impatient sometimes and we try to rush it, and then we mess things up. So it's best if we just relax and let things unfold, because things will unfold in God's own good time. And the only thing we should ever rush is trying to be closer to the divine and to try and be more receptive to guidance and to God's good coming into our lives. But to try and rush earthly things is an exercise in futility, because we're not going to do it anyway.
Yeah. It seems like today people are rushing about doing all kinds of things, you know, probably more than anything. People, certainly who come to us for counseling, are so tired,
yes.
You know, and it's interesting to me that people who are tired, which is a large number of people, it doesn't seem to have a relationship to how much they do, but often it has more to do with what they expect themselves to do. And it has to do with how it is that they spend their energy. Excuse me. And I think it's very important for us as we look at this issue of time that we do look at time and energy together. And because energy is expended as time passes, but then in fact we know the time doesn't really pass, and that it's really a way of marking the physical experience that we have. But when we look at it from a very practical standpoint, that's from a spiritual standpoint, of course, but from a practical standpoint, we all have 24 hours in a day. We all have the same number of minutes in a day, and yet some people are able to accomplish so much in such an effortless way, and so many other people are so seemingly unable to accomplish anything except to become more and more tired and more frazzled.
Yes, and the bottom line would be keeping their consciousness in present time. And we know from our own experience, when we don't keep our consciousness in present time, we get more frazzled, we get more tired, and we become far less effective. Because what we're doing when we're not keeping our consciousness and living in the now, or keeping our consciousness in present time, is we're reliving the past and feeling dread for the future, either or both. And so as we do that, then of course we get tired, because we're doing all those 16 things at one time, and then we're working really hard to get to accomplish whatever it is we need to accomplish on a daily, moment-to-moment basis. But we're mentally taking ourselves into the past and mentally dragging ourselves into the future, and fruitlessly. And so if we can just consciously keep our consciousness in present time, and that would be God's own good time, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. That's the definition. You've hit it right on the head. And that is that God's time is this present moment.
Yes.
And of course, we know that, again, as we said, time is simply a way that we measure the hours in an earthly day. But the fact is that if we believe in eternity, and we do, we're spiritual people, spiritual beings, we're psychological beings, and we're physical beings. But from a spiritual standpoint, and if we believe in the eternity of life and the eternity of all that is, we're always at the midpoint, as it's been said. We're always at the midpoint, and God's time is the present time, the present moment. And when I think about talking to people about their lives, as we review life experiences with people who've had stresses, or in other instances, I'm thinking about the conversations, and you and I have done a lot of work with people at the end of life experiences, both older people and younger people who have had illnesses that have brought their lives to a shorter period of span. But when we talk to people about their lives, so often at the end, wherever that is, depending upon, regardless of how old an individual is, if people have lived in the present moment, they feel that they've lived. But those who have lived their lives just as you describe it, in the past and in the future, seem to have felt that they've missed life and they've missed the moment. And I'm just thinking now about how many parents I've talked to, mothers and fathers, who've said, you know, I missed my children growing up. I was too busy working, or I was too busy doing this or doing that. And so many students will say, my best time was when I was in college or in school, and yet I missed those days because I was longing to be somewhere else. And I think we do step out of God's time, out of the present moment, and we miss life. And as we miss the present moment, we miss the experience of life. And sadly, there are a number of people in life who come to the end and find that they haven't lived at all because they've been too busy staying in the past and staying or looking into the future. Isn't that so?
Yes, and still continue doing that right up until their time to go has arrived. And as long as they're doing that, then again, they're not centering into the present. So they're not really gaining whatever it is they're supposed to gain, because we gain just through moment to moment living. Our thoughts help us to gain whatever it is we need to gain or take away from according to our thoughts. And everything is according to our thoughts, isn't it?
Absolutely. We've often said we live in our minds and not in the world. And so if our mind is in the present moment, if we really experience the present moment, then we do live life. If we don't experience the present moment, we miss life.
Yes.
And we mark time and we go through it, but we don't grow through it. And I just think how often we come in contact with other human beings and we miss them completely because we never get to know them. We never build on the relationships. We never build upon the intimacy of the relationship that we could have because we don't live in that present moment. And the present moment is all we have. And one of the things, example that I use a lot in my lectures and talks, and you've heard me say 100 times probably, is that example of how often we go into a restaurant and order our food, and then we go on with our meal and we want something else and that hasn't been brought to the table, and we have to think, well, I need to speak to the waitress, and we look up and we don't know who he or she is. Now here's a person who came to the table, probably said, my name is John or my name is Mary, I'm going to be your waiter or waitress today, how can I help you? Brought you water, took your order, walked away, came back to the table several times, and we don't even know whether they're male, female, we can't even identify them. We've missed them. They came into our lives and we missed them completely because we were so busy doing whatever it was we were doing. And I do the same thing, and sometimes I'm with other people, sometimes I'm by myself with a newspaper, and I'm more in the newspaper than I am recognizing the people that are with us. We have instances where we talk to parents and they'll say that I never really knew my children, and so they live 18 years in a household and never really live with that child or get to know that child. Relationships in the same way. And so this lack of our ability to connect keeps us from being in God's time, in the present moment, and we miss the experience. And then that's one of the deepest regrets, I think, that we have when we've missed the experience and it's gone.
Yes, and we impoverish ourselves in a pathetic way, where our lives would have been far more enriched if we had just listened and looked and felt into the energies of the people around us. I think people are getting more aware of that. Don't you think people, generally speaking, are becoming more aware of that?
I think they are.
Yes.
And I think some good techniques are taking place. I know I spend a lot of time in the business world, and a lot of the professional presentations that I make have to do with connecting our consciousness with the present moment. And one of the things that we tell business people so often is put the pen down, make eye contact, stop thinking about the budget or stop thinking about the expectations, start connecting with the people that are across the desk and having that connection. And that connection of person to person brings us into the present moment, and it brings us into the topic that we're talking about, into God's time. We in New Thought have such a wonderful, we have a lot of wonderful philosophies, I think, but New Thought is so filled with a positive, affirmative active, practical faith. And one of the aspects of New Thought is that everyone is divine, that there is an aspect of the divine within everyone. And there's that famous salutation in New Thought, and especially in the Unity movement, as the Christ in me, or the divine in me beholds the divine in you. And so as we see the divine in other people, as we see the divine in the experiences of life, then we can't let them pass by without coming to know them and connecting with them and being present in that moment. And if we see that, and if the divine in Mike salutes the divine in Iris, and the divine in Iris salutes the divine in Mike, then we make a connection. And certainly here over these many years, we've made that connection. And I don't think that at the end of our relationship, however that ends, either of us are going to feel that we've missed each other, because we have experienced each other so much and so fully, because we've appreciated each other and we've spent so much real present time together. And I think that's really what life's about, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah. It's people say it in a trite way, quality time. I have a little quality time with my children, and that's more valuable than if I had a lot of time with them and we were not really on a one-to-one. And that's true throughout life. And that's how, and we recognize people on a soul level. And if we see people, we recognize people from our past lives, from our past on a soul level. But if we see people on a soul level, we can remember them and they remember us. And it's a lasting energy. And it's just like in the restaurant or other places of commerce where we meet people publicly, just making eye contact does it, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And so few people do that.
Yes.
Well, I shouldn't say that. That's a judgment. But many people fail to do that.
Unfortunately, they do. And you and I have done it ourselves. And we know that when we've done it, it's like if we don't recognize our waitress, that's where we've been, a wool gathering. And so we haven't made eye contact with that one.
That eye contact makes the connection person to person, but it also makes connection with the present moment, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it puts the energy in full focus. And everything, as we always say, is energy and vibration. And so when two people connect, then their energies are merging and their energies are interconnecting. And that's so beautifully defined with a mother and child, or a father and child, when the baby is bonding with someone. Wouldn't even have to be a parent. But that is so lovely, and that's what bonding is. It's merging of those energies so that then they can call on that other times. And I've seen small children like who are like 2 years old who will just deliberately do something to upset the adult because they want attention and they're bored. So if that adult says, stop that, and becomes angry, then the child gets worse. But if the adult just laughs at the child, then the child laughs. And I saw that with my little 2-year-old grandson a long time ago when we were still in high chairs and couldn't walk. He would do things with his food, or he would pound on the bench to get his food, and I would just look at him and laugh because I thought it was so funny that this little tyrant was pretending to be a tyrant, and he was doing it deliberately, pretending. I mean, he was doing it, but it was just a deliberate. And so then I just laughed at him, and then he laughed, and it gave me a really good feeling of connection with that child because he was laughing at himself.
And there was a connection with you, with the two of you,
Yes.
and there was a connection with that present moment.
Yes.
Yes.
And he was empowered in his own right.
Absolutely, and that empowerment strengthened both of you. We'd like to pause at this point in the program and offer you the opportunity to receive some literature so that you can continue to study the ideas and concepts that we're sharing with you.
Would like to offer you the opportunity to receive one of these free booklets to further your understanding of the New Thought message of confident living. Each month we will feature a different booklet, which will be mailed to you free and postage paid. simply address your request to Confident Living at P.O. Box 7726, Long Beach, California, 90807.
In becoming aware of God's good time, we have to give up judgment, don't we? A judgment about when things should come to pass and should come to be. And in the first part of the program, we talked about the importance of connection, and that's really an important part of focusing on the present moment. But we also need to, when we look at time and the proper times, proper understanding of God's good time in our lives, understand that life is a mixture of good and bad, so to speak, of happy times and sad times. And we have to give up our decisions about how judgment should be meted out. And, you know, so often we think, well, if someone has done something wrong, then they ought to be punished, and it ought to happen soon. And I tell the story often about the prayer, you know, that I heard prayed before a meal once, and the minister, happened to be a priest who was praying the prayer, said, God help us and send your love to even to our enemies, but only after you've punished them sufficiently. And that's that was said facetiously, but a lot of times we want people to suffer according to their actions, according to our timing.
Yes, according to our perception of their actions.
Exactly. And in fact, the reality is that we just need to trust in divine providence and in the presence and the power of God, and release everything to good, and understand that everything operates within its own time at the right time, both those things that bring happiness and those things that bring us sometimes pain.
Exactly. And so often in interpersonal relationships, we put our own perception on someone else, and we try to see what they're doing and put our perception on it, when it might not be what the other person is meaning at all. And I think that's because their energies are not meshing. One is out in left field and the other is out in the other left field, and so they don't see eye to eye. They don't see what the other is thinking. And I was thinking about when couples are in a relationship or a marriage, and they get so unhappy with their mate or their partner, and then they get really they make a big to do about nothing, and they put their perception on the other person of what they did do or didn't do. Like I heard an attorney say, what he did or said is what people always fight about. So they put that perception on that person, and then they've not really merged their energies. They've not really tried to see where the other person is coming from, or just accept that this is how they feel at the moment. And then it creates problems. And that problem could have been alleviated if they would have done what we were saying earlier, if the two people had looked at each other and said what they thought, and then just calmly discussed whatever the situation might have been. And it would save a lot of grief and heartache in the world, wouldn't it? If we could all just slow down and think before we speak and really relate to the other person.
Absolutely. Slow down. Yeah. There's the key. Slow down, relate to other people, and respect other people.
Yes, and look them in the eye when we're doing it. Because it's hard to get really too upset with someone whom you're just looking eye to eye with, isn't it? Whether it's a child you're disciplining, or it's a person you're counseling, or whatever it might be. If we're looking at that person, and then again, it's all energy, so our energies are blending and merging, and then we're really seeing from the other person's viewpoint. And so when we do that, life is so much more beautiful.
Absolutely. And the other aspect that we want to touch on is that in God's good time, God is in the midst of every moment and in the midst of every experience. And for those who aren't religious or spiritual, the divine, the higher power, the reality of something greater than ourselves is present in the midst of where we are, no matter what we are, no matter what's happening, no matter what's taking place in our lives. And if we can just be present in the experience of the moment, if we can be in the now, as we say in New Thoughts often, in the present moment, and then understand the reality that the divine is there with us in that experience, then we are in perfect time, and the timing of every experience and of every outcome will be perfect.
Yes. And I was just thinking that again, we're creating that certain energy that you were just now describing, in a sense. And so there's a man named Dr. Lynn Horowitz who has created a piece of equipment that costs from $800 to $1,000, and supposedly it picks up the music of the spheres. It picks up the music from, he calls it the music from heaven, I would call it the music of the spheres, or God's own music, he calls it. And also, it changes our energy level. And I'd like to see how that works, wouldn't you?
It'd be very interesting to see it.
It wouldn't be surprising if we have come to the point in time where we can artificially create that energy. And we wouldn't go into that like the movie in artificial intelligence and so forth. But science is doing so much to help us see more who and what we are and where we've been and where we're going, that it's a very exciting time to be here, isn't it?
Oh, this is the best of times to be here. You know, and so many people are pessimistic or negative about life or about circumstance or situation. And one of the things that we share all the time is this is the best time to be. This is the time that we are appointed, not just the two of us, but all of us on this planet are appointed to be here at this time, that everything is moving in exactly the right at the right rate of speed that it needs to, and time is perfect for everything that we need to have. And so much of our time and our work and the work of the church and in our counseling is spent helping people understand the positive aspects of life. And it's so easy today to become a part of the negativity. And we say so often and caution people against, don't allow yourself to be a part of that. Don't allow people to tell you that these are the worst of times. Don't allow people to tell you that things are bad or awful, when in fact this is the good time. These are the good old days. Every day is the good old days of tomorrow. And we are in the midst of the good old days. We're in the midst of the good days, because this is the time and this is the moment that has brought us to the point where we need to be. And every one of us is exactly where we need to be. We are in perfect time, in God's perfect time, now and always. And if we could just trust that and realize that and understand that and be there and accept it, we would enjoy life fully and completely.
Yes, and our lives would be far more less stressful and far more enjoyable and far more productive. And that's what we all want. We want to be happy and productive and not to be stressed out. So if we have control and charge of our lives, you mentioned self-responsibility earlier, that's the bottom line, that's the key, isn't it? We have to be responsible and assume that responsibility, but have faith that there is a higher power guiding us, available to us, to guide us, and that we can look at any time. And we can go home to God at any moment. And that's what we're doing when we center ourselves. We're going home to God. That's what we're doing when we're listening in meditation. And that's what we're doing when we relate to another person fully with no judgment, just total acceptance. And that's such a beautiful way of life. And it's hard to do that when we listen to the news and then we're not living in present time, we're living in what's already happened or fearful for what's next is going to happen. So if people are inclined to be, to find it difficult to keep in present time, then I would say don't watch the TV news too much, because it jerks your energies around.
It does. It draws from our energies. And that's always good counsel. Those things that are perplexing or are adding difficulty to our lives are things to be avoided. Now, don't avoid all the problems and difficulties at all, because we do grow from the difficulties. But the fact is that if the news does bother an individual, then I would agree. Don't dwell upon it, but strengthen yourself in the awareness of the fact that this is the place where we need to be, that things are all right, and we need that reassurance. Also, before time gets away, we only have a couple of minutes. It's hard to believe we only have a couple of minutes left in this program. But we really need to remind people that as we go through the experiences of life, that whatever we feel and wherever we are is all right. And we need to be where we are. And we need to not deny how we're feeling about any circumstance or situation. But we need to be where we are, and we need to allow that feeling to come out within us. We need to examine it, and we need to be willing to respond to it. And if it is negative in energy, then we need to be willing to do some inner work, if you will, to help ourselves to look at life in a more positive or affirmative way.
Yes, and find out what it is that's causing us to be sad or depressed. And a lot of times in winter, it's just that people don't get enough light, or the lights, the artificial lights they use, are debilitating to their system. And I used to know a lady many years ago who said that every January she became so sad she was almost suicidal, and she wasn't really suicidal, but she was. It was not a happy time for her, and it's because of the light, the changing of the light, and the way her house was situated, the way the sun came in and set in the evening. She didn't get sunlight into her house. And so when she realized that, it made a big difference, and it cheered her up just to know the solution to the problem. So we can just look and see what it is we're feeling that makes us sad, and if it's, again, if it's extraneous news that we're bringing into our home, then we can just get bits and pieces of it instead of a constant barrage. And if it's that we're sad at certain times, then check the lighting and actually the body works better if we sleep at night and work and are up during the day. And people who have different schedules where they're not able to do that have to really work on it. So we have to just look and see what is our problem, and then see a reasonable answer for it.
And embrace the reality that all of the things that are happening are in God's good time, and that we're right where we need to be, and that all of the things that we need to do and to know and to experience are right here in the present moment. And as we leave our viewers today, one of the things that we'd like to invite them to do is to really live in the now. Be in the present moment, because when you live in the present moment, you are indeed living in God's perfect time. And we hope that the information that we've shared with you has been useful, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Mike and Iris would like to extend a cordial invitation for you to join them this Sunday morning at 11 a.m. for our weekly celebration service at the beautiful Seaport Marina Hotel at the corner of Pacific Coast Highway and 2nd Street, adjacent to the Marina Pacifica and Marketplace shopping centers. There will be a guided meditation, prayers, spirited music, and a dynamic, life-changing New Thought message. Please join us this Sunday. You will be warmly welcomed into the company of like-minded, positive, and uplifting people. And remember, whatever your dream, whatever your vision, you can attain it through confident living.